Well, thanks for sticking around so long. I've got three main points I want to cover, and I've got some nice pictures to do with them. So we're not going to need bullet points along the way. So you'll just have to have 3 points in mind. I want to do a little background on the historical relationship between economic development and the distribution of power in society. I think it's relevant, in particular, how what we think of as democracy is related to economic development. And then I want to look at the Occupy movement a little bit as a reaction to the systemic problem we have between capitalism on one hand, a free market economy, and democracy on the other. And then the last thing we look at is how capitalism and democracy might be actually compatible, how to make them more compatible, perhaps. Anyway, a lot of the classes I teach, can you hear me right? Better stay in front, okay. Stay close to the mic, got it. Hold on, I'm a wanderer on stage. I'm very unused to this, but I'll try. Anyway, a lot of the classes I teach deal with long-term historical trends. So a lot of the classes I teach, for example, cover 3,000 to 5,000 years of history. It's kind of fun because you get to look at all sorts of different developments. And one of the most interesting is the development of a trend toward democratization, how people participate in government, where the distribution of power is spread more broadly in society. And everybody, of course, is familiar with the ancient Greeks as the origins of democracy. Athens was kind of an unusual place because unlike other places in the ancient world, they had approximately 20,000 people who participated, 20 to 30,000 people who participated in politics, and that was a democracy. Now, it's important to understand that Athens was about 300,000 people living there. So what we're talking about is basically the citizens of Athens, the men, not the slaves, not the foreigners, certainly not the women. Athens was a very patriarchal society. How did this come about? Well, in the century before democracy came to Athens, there was a real boom in the Greek economy. The markets expanded, agriculture became more specialized, because Greece, you can't grow a lot of grain. They tended to focus on growing olives for olive oil, which had all sorts of uses. And they had specialized areas of commerce. And this led to merchants becoming particularly wealthy, and yeoman farmers, specialist independent farmers becoming wealthy. These people had been locked out of power for a very long time. The people that held power were the oligarchy, the aristocratic nobility, the warrior aristocracy. And what happened was, through a series of agitations over about a 120-year period, from about 620 to 508 BCE, they engineered coups. They used tyrants, and one of the first things they did was they focused on laws, getting control of the laws. At first, they just wanted, just write down the laws. We just want to see what the laws are. And then after a while, well, maybe we could change the laws, because the laws were favoring non-merchants. They were favoring the aristocratic oligarchy. And so gradually what they did is they eliminated things like debt slavery. If you were a merchant, you went into debt. If you didn't have the money to pay for it, you became a slave of somebody, and that was pretty harsh for trade. So gradually, over this 120-year period, the Athenians, the Athenian merchant class and yeoman farmer class, independent farmers, they agitated for and received political representation in Athens. And it didn't come without some bloodshed. And I'm certainly not here advocating violence in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just saying back in the ancient world, that's kind of the way things work. It's kind of interesting also to look at how Athenian democracy died. It died mostly through warfare, through the wars with Sparta, but also losing wars with Macedon. And ultimately, part of the reason it died was because the electorate, the Athenian people, found democracy really difficult. It's not easy. They actually had fines for people that didn't get to the assembly on time. And there was a lot of pressure to force people to become involved in direct democracy. This wasn't representative democracy, it was democracy where people participated. The last thing I'll note about it, and we'll move on to the Romans real quickly before getting into the more current stuff, is that democracy in Athens was influenced heavily by slick talkers, people that created narratives, the equivalent, I guess, of Fox News, if you want to think of it that way. These were people that encouraged warfare. They encouraged people to do things against their best interests, against the best interests of the state of Athens itself. So ultimately, Athens, part of the reason the democratic experiment died there was because the people weren't particularly well educated. Democracy, besides taking time, it also takes some learning, some education, and education wasn't freely available. And ultimately, people believed the slick talkers, the narrative creators, that they had to go to war and that type of thing, and it led to a sort of falling apart of democratic society in the 4th century. So that's one lesson of democracy or democratization from the past that I think is kind of instructive and useful. Another one was the Romans. The Romans, of course, were the people that influenced Jefferson, Adams, and so forth. And Roman society had kind of an interesting dichotomy because the 1% in the Roman society was the patrician class, or the patrician caste, really. About 125 families in ancient Rome that held all the public offices and controlled the political space. But what happened was amongst the plebeians, they became wealthier, they became more numerous, and in 450 BCE, they held a general strike. And they basically told the patricians, we won't fight your wars, we won't do your laundry, we won't participate until you meet our demands. And their demands were very similar, actually, to the Athenian demands in the 7th century BCE. In 450, all the Romans really wanted was, all the plebeians really wanted was to have the laws written down. They just wanted to see what the laws were. But gradually, over the course of 250 years, they agitated through general strikes and through their participation in warfare. Interestingly enough, they gained status in Roman society by being involved in warfare. And gradually what they did is they obtained the ability to pass laws that were binding on all Roman citizens, so on the patricians as well as the plebeians, and the old boundaries between the 1% and the 99% broke apart as these plebeians gained more and more political rights. Ultimately, Roman warfare also destroyed democracy or democratization. It was a republic. Warfare, in particular, the Punic Wars, which lasted about 100 years, and really in just 3 big phases. What happened during the Punic Wars were the yeoman farmers, the independent farmers out in the countryside, were forced to go further and further away from home for long periods of time. And as they did that, they weren't able to maintain their estates. And the 1%, the senatorial class, bought those estates up, and they created slave estates. And the Roman yeomans, farmers, they moved into the city and became the landless masses that became dependent on bread and circuses. There was an important moment, and I don't think I didn't actually get a good picture of these guys, but in 133 and 120 BC, 2 brothers, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus, they advocated for the redistribution of property to the yeoman farmers, because these people were no longer considered citizens. They didn't have property. They didn't have a say in government. And this was an attempt to redistribute wealth and ultimately redistribute power in Roman society. And the senatorial class became very incensed, and both these guys, by the way, were from the 1%, so not all the 1% is always bad. These were people that their grandfather was the most prestigious general in Roman history, a guy named Scipio Africanus. And